Hey everyone, I'm Will Sheldon, partner at Expedition. And today we're thrilled to be joined by Marilyn Miller, one of Expedition's operating advisors. Marilyn has been Chief People Officer for some incredible companies over the years, including Anaplan, Alfresco, Netskope, and most recently launched Darkly. And she is a trusted advisor to founders and CEOs on all things talent, HR, and organizational scaling. When we at Expedition are meeting with high growth software companies with bootstrapped capital efficient routes here in Europe, one topic that is almost always top of mind is expanding in the US. So today we are going to go deep on that, given Marilyn's experience of working with companies with roots outside the US in many cases that have then grown successfully into North America. Marilyn, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's jump into it. Marilyn, you've led people and HR for some remarkable companies over the years. Companies founded here in the UK, in Europe, and North America. And you're based in the US personally. For the companies founded elsewhere that have then attempted to launch and scale in North America, what would be one or two insights that you've gathered about what really works?
Great question. I think I would start with helping founders, CEOs understand that when you're moving into new countries, you're expanding your operations, it impacts every function in the organization. I think sometimes we get excited and lead with sales and revenue functions in terms of the expansion, but think more holistically about the impact that it has for your product and engineering. There could be localized languages and other features that might be required to get the market traction. It impacts your legal, finance, HR teams as well. So early on, engage across the function or across the organization to ensure that everybody understands what it's going to take to expand into a new market.
I think that's such a great point. We often, it's tempting to think about, okay, it's just a go-to-market expansion maybe, but your experience is actually, it's a cross-team, cross-function effort. From a people perspective, Marilyn, what would be your reflections on that? What do people miss from an HR and talent perspective when they move into the US?
I think there's several layers to that. There's the obvious, how do we set up an employee of record, make sure that we have all the compliance, governance, risk, tax accounting, those obvious pieces. But I also think you want to be very thoughtful about the talent market. For example, in the US market, there's a lot of variance from the talent markets on East Coast, West Coast, North, South. And so you want to be very diligent about understanding how you're going to recruit, retain that talent, what will matter to that talent in their context. And that's as equally important part as understanding your customers and the other requirements for entering a new market.
If you are advising or working with a software company over here in Europe, what signals would you look for to determine if that company is ready to move into North America?
So a couple of things I would add there. One, are you stable in your first market? And are you starting to get brand awareness outside of that? Are you starting to build global customers so that you understand the nuances and requirements of working with highly distributed, large global? And then, and only then, if you are ready to expand, really understanding the amount of investment of time, resources, I would suggest you be more patient than and making sure that the timing is right just because of the requirements for that expansion.
That's great. So I'm hearing, a good point to really consider it is when in some ways you're being pulled in by a global base of customers. Maybe US customers are finding your product. Maybe some of your European customers are already active in the US market. You're not going in blind, as it were, but in fact, there's clear pull, and that's the right time to really consider it.
Yes.
So let's say we're at that point. Really, there are several different archetypes of how European companies go about entering the market. You could send a trusted salesperson to open a small outpost. Maybe a founder or multiple founders could relocate. You might hire a general manager for a US entity, or just try to do it remotely from Europe. What would be your advice for founders and CEOs thinking through these options? What's the right framework to think about?
I actually think any of those strategies could be the right strategy. It's being super intentional about that market and engaging across the organization. I would make this a decision that is inclusive of the points of view from the major functions. I think any strategy can work as long as you understand and have that explicit and intentional approach to the market. I've seen it work where you do bring someone over. It helps, quickly. They have the institutional knowledge, they have how the company operates, they have the network and the relationships, back at the main headquarters to help get things done. I've also seen it work where you do hire directly in talent in that market, but then you have to be really thoughtful about how you support any one of those strategies. And a combination of those strategies might work as well. Bring over a founder and then, or, someone from the headquarters and quickly surround them with local talent that can help context your business for the market that you're in.
That makes a lot of sense. And for founders and CEOs that decide to open that physical presence in North America, it's a big place. What would be your advice to decide where, the right city, the right location? How should folks think through that?
I think the first place I would start is, do you have a concentration of a customer base? Being close to your customers will be, I mean, again, it's such a large geography that if you can pick a city that is somewhere co located with a strong customer base, and then I would engage your talent acquisition partner or your talent acquisition team, understand the available talent in that market. What are their drivers for the attraction and retention? And I think, between those two, being close to the customer and understanding the available labor market there would set you up for the best success.
What would be one thing that you wish more European founders understood about the US talent market, attracting and retaining folks, especially in competitive segments?
The US talent market is unique. I think, just from our pay practices and our, again, sort of the drivers for retention. And that's really doing your homework and understanding, the specific market that you're going into, spend the time to really understand what that available market is and those drivers. And again, leveraging your talent acquisition team, there's lots of ways that they can get an insight and a point of view that is unique to either the city or the region or the place that you want to build your team and do your hiring.
So, for teams who are trying to get a sense of which of these smaller ecosystems to base themselves in, would you have any tactical tips of how to go about doing that?
Yeah, I think a couple things that organizations may not understand is that in addition to your talent acquisition, being able to leverage tools and data and systems to get knowledge and insight on the local talent market, the other rich resource is your real estate partner. The real estate companies have a wealth of information on available talent, cost of living, who else is employed there, how that market is operating. So take advantage of that resource as well. They can be quite helpful.
That's such a great tip. So, you've established your presence in North America now, and now you get into this zone of having a distributed organization. You have a headquarters somewhere in Europe, and you have an outpost a growing office in North America. Let's talk about culture and team cohesion. What would be some of the best ways, in your view, to manage, build, and maintain that strong culture when we're now a transatlantic company?
I think the first thing is just making sure you're incredibly intentional about your culture. Be explicit about how you work, what you expect, the way you get things done, how you build teams and collaborate and work across the organization. I would also consider identifying talent who really represents your culture best and invite them to be part of the expansion of your culture into these new markets. So in the past, I've done things like identifying what we call culture carriers or culture ambassadors, and we give them an explicit role of transporting the culture, contexting it for your new local market, but understanding sort of at that thinner layer of the organization, how you work, what you expect, the ways you come together. I think can be a really powerful way to make sure that you keep the culture strong across the organization as you go into new markets, and the teams have fun doing it. And it helps them, also build their cultural acumen outside of the business world. What kind of food, music, other interesting things that can help bring the organization together.
That's great. So you're picking folks from, let's say, the headquarters in Europe, and you're inviting them to move over to North America for a period of time. Is that right? Or they're doing it remotely?
Yeah, either moving over or at least having an intentional role of connecting with those new team members, the new hires, and explicitly finding time to bring them together. And it can be virtually, but having sessions of getting to know each other, talking about the way the company operates, answering questions, building relationships, getting to know them outside of the work world as well. I think creates a really strong foundation, building trust, having the new employees understand they have a supportive network back at headquarters when they do have questions or they do need help. They have lifelines that they can reach out to. And it just extends the culture of the organization very, very quickly.
That's so true. And you mentioned earlier in your point there, Marilyn, around the importance of being intentional and clear about what the company culture is. Can you share, in your experience, what are some of the best ways of doing that? Is this about writing it down? Do you like tools like Notion, etc., to capture that? Is it transmitted through regular town halls, etc.? What are some real life tactics for founders to help make that culture as clear as possible?
I actually think it's all of the above. I think you do want to be very explicit who we are, how we work, and I would commit that to writing, but then I would also reinforce it in all the ways that you talked about. You would use that to assess your talent as you're hiring. Do they work and operate in a way that's consistent with the company culture? Is this the way we reward and recognize? Is this included in the way that we do storytelling? Storytelling is so powerful. And when you weave in the stories that you're telling around how you won a customer, how you solved a problem, how you innovated, and you're drawing from the way that you work, your culture, it just continues to reinforce, um, the culture that you're looking for and the culture that you're going to hold your teams accountable to.
One of the topics that we hear from founders here in Europe, and we see with the companies we work with, is that when it comes to hiring, particularly go to market talent in the US, these folks often, there is this cultural difference with some countries in Europe. They're often very good at selling their experience, selling their capabilities. It can be a risky process for European companies to avoid some negative selection bias of folks who maybe like the idea of working for a smaller European company or what have you, various risks. How would you advise founders to approach, particularly the go-to-market hiring? Are there certain interview questions or styles that you like? Are there mitigants to some of these risks to help maximize the chance of success for founders in making these moves?
So I'm very much aligned to behavioral based interviewing as well as storytelling. And I think if you're new in a market, one thing from the sales team is how curious are they? How are they able to solve problems? How are they able to work independently? Because that's going to be required if they're first in a new market. And I would ask lots of questions, starting with tell me about a time when they had to operate in what would be a similar circumstance in your company and get them to tell stories. And you're listening for things, did they have too much of a reliance on, heavy resources or other people that, were able to get things done for them? If that's not the case, then they're going to have to operate very independently and they're going to have to be very good problem solvers. They're going to be needing to take a lot of initiative to help bridge the gap between the new market and the headquarters. Ask questions that would get at, have they done this before and how did they do it? And does that align to the context that they would be coming into within your own company?
Yes. Getting down into the kind of weeds from a technical perspective, because it's a topic that it's kind of hard to access. For founders who are making their first few US hires, could you mention one or two things they should definitely be thinking about when it comes to legals, compensation, etc.? What nuances are there in the US market, and how would you advise European founders to get their arms around that?
And earlier, we talked about making sure you're engaging every function in the organization. And this is where, again, engaging finance, legal, and HR early in the process when you're thinking about going into a new market. The right choice might be, engaging an employer of record, a PEO that can help set all of this up and make sure that you have all the compliance. All the reporting and governance that you need. And it takes that burden off rest of organization. It might be a little bit more expensive, but it is a more assured way to go into a new market, I think.
For sure. Okay, let's zoom out again. So there's lots to consider here for founders who are expanding into the US. But if you had to distill it down into one insight or one piece of advice you'd love to give all founders who are considering this part, what would be probably the number one takeaway you would share with folks?
I think it'll relate to an earlier conversation that we had is ensure that the timing is right and that the entire organization is ready for that expansion because it takes a lot of resource, it takes a lot of intention. And so making sure that the readiness is there beyond just the sales and revenue and that you're engaging those teams early so that there's a holistic and a complete plan for the new market and the new expansion. The last thing you want is surprises, and whether it's from your accounting or revenue rec or attracting talent or setting up, your infrastructure. I think some early investment in aligning the entire management team around and getting everyone's point of view of what will be required will help you go faster, be more efficient, and get a quicker return on your investment there. Because it's a big effort. You're dealing with time zones and you're stretching people's days, earlier and later. And you want the whole company to be really excited about the opportunity and the growth stage that you're in. And so that would be my advice there.
That's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that, Marilyn. And thanks so much for sharing the insights with us today. It's been great to touch on this topic. I know there's a lot deeper we could go. And thanks for all the support you're giving us and the Expedition portfolio companies in real time on this topic as we work through this. Thanks again, Marilyn, for your time. And we'll look forward to speaking again soon.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I love working with this stage of companies as they're, getting stage ready for the next scale up and the next growth. And it's been a pleasure.
Great. Thanks. Bye for now.